But by his own admission, his campaign wasn't without its controversies. Shaun was criticised for some of the things he had written, said and shared on social media, and there were ongoing whispers that senior Tories were looking to replace him with another candidate. But the naysayers were wrong. Shaun nearly triumphed in a shock result, with vote counting going to a second-round runoff. This knock to Sadiq Khan's pride has dented him to such an extent that many now suggest he won't run for a third term. It's also left some people questioning that perhaps if Shaun had had wider support from the Tory party and the leadership, he could have won. Shaun certainly hasn't had a traditional route into politics either. He was an army cadet and spent 5 years sofa surfing while homeless in his 20s, and then went on to become a youth worker. And it's this tough upbringing that Shaun says shaped his political vision and has made him a more empathetic politician than most. Shaun, great to have you in the studio. I know
great to be here.
This is your first major interview since the mayoral race. And let's just be completely honest about it, Shaun. Most people wrote you off. They thought that you were going to lose by a record margin. I really believe the Westminster class, the media class, the political class, they believed all of the polls. The polls were completely wrong. They weren't listening to what Londoners thought. And for me, it was a real disgrace, actually, because I think if the race had got more attention in the media, if it had been covered as a race where there was a realistic chance of you winning, we could have had a different result. But is that how you feel about it?
Look, if you're me, I come from a poor, black, working class household. I'm used to being written off. And when I wasn't getting the support I wanted from the press and elsewhere, I just put my head down and got on with it. My proudest boast was I was selected by London Tories. They had a choice, they chose me, and they backed me all the way. And they're a big part of how I made this result happen. We're proud of what we did. And I knew from the very beginning, Londoners needed an alternative. It doesn't matter if you're Labour or if you're Conservative or anywhere in between. We have too much murder in London, not enough housing in London, and our transport system is falling to pieces. We have a mayor who's focused on his career, not on the health and wealth of Londoners. And of course, he keeps separating London from the rest of the country. If you're sat in Sheffield, Wales, Birmingham, you loathe the words London. I wanted to show the country that London is a big part of the country. We want to play our part. And I think by having that conversation, I was giving Londoners somewhere that they could vote comfortably.
Yeah. And I do want to talk about law and order, and we'll come to it, because, you know, I wrote about it before the election. I think it's a huge issue for folk in London, and it was one of the reasons why you ended up having a much more successful campaign than most people predicted. However, Shaun, we can't get away from the fact that at certain points in your campaign, remember this was a much longer campaign because of the delay given the pandemic, at certain points, senior figures within the Tory party withdrew their support of you. There were leaks to the press that they wanted to replace you. There were leaks to the press that maybe they were going to parachute Sajid Javidan to run. Why did they do that? Why were they trying to undermine you? What had you done to annoy the Tory party elite?
The first thing, I don't need reminding, it was a long campaign. I was there for every second of it. I think that, look, my politics has always been about working people. I am not concerned about the Westminster bubble or the chattering classes. I'm concerned about people. If they miss a week's wages, they're done. If they miss some salary for a month, they're done. That's what my politics is about.
But you needed the money and you needed the support.
But that's the point, isn't it? I've always spoken in the rawest, clearest terms I can about the lives that Londoners are leading. I think some people didn't like that. Other people weren't aware of just the connection I have with London. I was born and raised here. I make it my point to speak to black, white, young and old. I go around. So I had a very different take on what was happening. And I was hearing from Londoners, we want change. Now, I remember when the first rumours came out, we're going to get rid of Shaun, Boris rang me and he said, you know, don't listen to him, bugger. I won't use the exact language he used. This is a family show. He basically
We're after the watershed, thank goodness.
He basically said, don't listen to those buggers. They tried this on me in 2006. I'm on your side. It was slightly disappointing that the whole party wasn't behind me, but it was such a proud point.
Who wasn't behind you?
If I knew who that was, I'd have set Boris on them. He made it quite clear to me. If I can
Was
find
Carrie Johnson behind you?
I tell you what Carrie did. Carrie helped me get my campaign manager. One, Ben Mallet, he was absolutely brilliant. He helped me shape my inner being and get out into the public arena. So she was very helpful. Boris was helpful as well. And so were the cabinet, actually. But like Boris said, this is politics. It's a dirty game. People always try it on. You can't please all the people all the time. So I decided to try to please working Londoners.
Because I heard that at one point, Shaun, Number 10 were annoyed with you because you didn't follow their position on lockdowns. You were standing up for the London hospitality industry and saying that London should be opened up, but that ruffled feathers within Number 10. Is it fair to say that there were some difficult conversations around that time?
Listen, that wasn't the only conversation I had that was difficult, but let's be clear. My politics has always been about representing people. If you're running to be Mayor of London, you can't be the mouthpiece of the government. You've got to be the mouthpiece of Londoners. And sometimes that meant we butted heads. And it's quite nice saying to Boris, well, Boris, when you were Mayor, you were renowned for being independent. I'm going to go that way as well. You're not credible in London unless you can be independent.
Well, indeed. And actually, that brings us on to our first very good question from our viewers, who are, of course, most important during this interview, Shaun. And it's Tryman from the West Midlands, who asks straight, will you run for Mayor of London again? Of course, there are suggestions that Boris has already asked you to do that.
Boris mentioned it. Look, I'd say this, Tryman, two things. Firstly, I need to get some sleep. It was a long campaign.
Yeah.
Secondly, you'd have to ask my wife if I'm allowed to.
Yeah.
But all joking aside, all campaigns, all elections are fought in unique circumstances. If I thought I had something to offer London and the party in London has wanted me, I would consider it. But right here, right now, the plan is to get a bit more sleep, spend some time with the children.
Yeah, no, I understand that. But unfortunately, the result means that we remain in the capital with this situation where you've got a Labour mayor who is at war with the government. So isn't the concern that it's actually Londoners who are going to miss out as a result of this negative behaviour? You could argue from both sides.
There's two things I'd say. Firstly, the idea that the government are anti-London is simply not true. It's something being peddled by the London Labour Party.
But they're not working closely with the mayor,
this is the important part. They need to be careful about that, because when you peddle that, you set London against the rest of the country. London is not great despite the rest of the country. It's great because of the rest of the country. And that theme should be carried through. And actually, I think the government will deliver most of what they need to deliver on without Sadiq Khan. They just get on and do it. They don't let him get in the way. And that's something I'm on the London Assembly. We Conservatives push that point. Even my Lib Dem, my Green colleagues push the mayor to do what's right for London. I don't think we need to worry that the government are going to abandon London. But they are fighting with Sadiq Khan because he's demonstrated over a 5-year period he simply will not be collegiate. He will act for his career first and for Londoners second.
And the problem is, there's a real issue of law and order. And, you know, I've spoken to you about this before. Personally, I've been the victim of 2 muggings on the streets of London over the past 2 years. 1 attempted mugging. Virtually everyone I know has either been the victim of a mugging or an attempted mugging. There is a huge law and order issue. But Shaun, what about people who say, well, how is that the fault of Sadiq Khan? Is that not the fault of the Home Secretary?
I'll say 3 things about crime in London. Firstly, if you're sat outside London thinking, why are we talking about London again? What's this got to do with me? The crime in London has become so bad, we now export it through county lines. So you could be having crime in your area that originated in London. So it's important to the whole country. The second piece is Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, is the crime commissioner for London, the police and crime commissioner for London. That is his job. He has complete budgetary control over the police. The third piece is that he's never backed the police. He's been wishy-washy on crime. He's blamed things on poverty where actually his responsibility. And I'll remind you of this. When he was campaigning to be mayor the first time, he said he'd stop, stop and search. When it suited him, he said he'd start, stop and search. The police didn't know where they were. They didn't know what to do. He'll talk about a public health approach to crime. He was the last person to adopt that. I wrote him a year before he used those words. He was reluctant to do it.
Do you think he's anti the police?
in my opinion, he certainly hasn't supported them in the way they need supporting. Policing in London is tough, and every opportunity he's had to abandon them, he has done so.
Because he backed Dawn Butler, didn't he? When she claimed that the police had pulled her over and that it was somehow connected to her race, even though the police said the windows were tinted. We had absolutely no idea who was behind the window.
But it's situations like, you remember what he did around Extinction Rebellion? And
oh, I do.
And the difference he was when people were trying to protect the statues of London, very different responses. You cannot, as mayor, pick a side. He did it because he thought it's politically expedient for him. But the worst thing he did for me, the Sarah Everard case, was really painful for the women of London, and of course for her family and her friends. And he said that's a conversation between the police and the government. It's his legal duty to be involved in that conversation, and he abandoned Londoners, the women of London, at that point.
But you were heavily criticised for your reaction to the Sarah Everard murder. I mean, you tweeted saying, as a father and a husband, it breaks me to think that my wife and daughter have to live in fear in their own city. It doesn't have to be that way. As a mayor, I'll ensure we deliver safety. And a lot of people said, Shaun, you politicised a murder before actually knowing the circumstances of that murder.
Look, if someone who's running for Mayor of London, who is a father, so I came from my personal angle, who is a father, cannot speak about crime in London, who can? We have a Mayor of London in Sadiq Khan who abandoned us all. He said, with no shame in his voice, the streets are not safe for women and girls in London. That's ridiculous. They were safe under Ken for women and girls, and they were safe under Boris. It's his failing. So I'm proud to have shone a light on that, because we needed to do something about it. And
okay, look, we've got loads of questions coming in from our viewers, so I need to get to them, Shaun. Alex from Arundel says, when will we all be able to work from home? It makes our home lives so much better. It should be the future.
I have to disagree. Look, the thing is, in London, we have a vibrant community that thrives on commuters and tourists as well. And if we all work from home, there is 100,000 businesses and more in London that will just die, and the employment will go with it. So I actually think it's important that people move around and come back to work.
Get back to the office. I say the same thing. It's fun. It's how we meet people.
Most people meet the person they marry at work. Young people are developed at work. You've got to get in the
You don't want to work from home. Get back in. We need you. Victoria in Kingston says, the report about white children neglected in education today is shocking. Are you surprised by its findings, or is this a problem you have noticed before? This is, of course, the Education Select Committee report.
I've been following the story all week. No, I'm not surprised, and it's very old news. The first time I heard about this would have been 2004. Look, what's really painful for me is that people are bandying about words like white privilege and talking about other groups failing. There's two important things I'd say. Firstly, we must not set one group against another. This identity politics is damaging, and if you're at home and you're black, it's damaging to us in the same way it's damaging to white people as well. But the key thing here, the touch point, is working class, black working class or white working class. We're working class in different ways for different reasons, but we're the groups that need the support. So we should look at this report, read it properly. Same as the Sewell report. Everybody complained, but did actually read it. The recommendations were great. Read these reports and lift up all communities. We must bring people together.
James in Gainsborough asks Shaun Bailey, would you force everyone to scrap their gas boiler and get an expensive air source heat pump instead, supposedly to save the planet? Now, this is a Tory Green policy which is going to cost ordinary folk a huge amount of money. Are you behind it? I wouldn't scrap it unless I could subsidise it. Look, the bottom line is this: if you can heat your house better with these things, they're cheap or whatever, there's a business behind that, you know, you can build our economy, great. But I would not force anybody to do anything, because I come from a background where I know anything like £100 change in your monthly goings on could wipe you out. So I'm always very reluctant to pile taxes on top of people. And that's another reason why I ran for Mayor of London. Sadiq Khan has abandoned working class people in London with his rise in the congestion charge, expansion of ultra low emission zone. All of these things are making it impossible to live in London. And Adele has sent us in a question to GBNews, and it's a good point to end the section. Do you think you could win the mayoral election next time?
Who knows? I'm optimistic. Of course I can. I think given a longer time to speak to Londoners, and I think actually 3 more years of Sadiq Khan will really show Londoners that we can do better. We need help in Londoners. For my mind, Sadiq Khan's not the man to do it.
And I would hope that the Westminster media bubble might take you a bit more seriously next time and give you some of the coverage that is deserved.